In our original Genesis line of airbrushes, we have different airbrushes for different needs. However, the engineering behind all of them is very similar. To start off with, the XG is a traditional style double action airbrush with a gravity feed cup. The XN has a smaller needle size and consequently a smaller color cup, and then we have the side feed version in the XS. Once again though, all of these airbrushes, the basic engineering is identical, but for today's purposes we're going to go ahead and demonstrate how to disassemble and reassemble the XG. With the Genesis XG airbrush, we have a few tools that we need to do a full disassembly. We have a large standard head screwdriver, a small standard head screwdriver, and then the wrench that comes with the airbrush. To start, simply remove the color cup top. We also have the handle here. Simply remove that. Then we have the needle assembly with the needle chuck. We simply loosen the knurl, slide the needle out, and because we're going to fully disassemble, we do need to remove the knurl as well. Now we have the spring housing. Okay, we have our needle spring and chuck. They may come out together, otherwise they are two separate pieces. We have our trigger, which has two tangs inside. Simply lift up and turn 90 degrees and it comes right out of the airbrush. We also have our actuator, which is the back side of the trigger assembly area. And the easiest way to get that out is just to simply upend the airbrush and let it drop right out. So there's the actuator. On the front end we have our nozzle cap, which in this case is threaded. We have the nozzle cap, and then now we have the fluid nozzle. This is where you are going to utilize the wrench. It has a slotted end. It simply interfaces with the fluid nozzle. Simply turn it counterclockwise. Once loose, you should be able to remove the fluid nozzle by finger. And there we go. Going back to the rest of the body, we have the valve assembly. This is all one compact unit. It just simply comes out just like that. On the underside, we have our set screw. This is where you're going to use the small screwdriver, counterclockwise. Turn it until it comes out. You may use your fingers. And then lastly, we have a guide screw inside the airbrush body. And that's where the large screwdriver comes in handy. Simply slide that in. Okay, once some of the threads are exposed, you can remove the guide screw with your fingers. So now all that remains is the piston inside the airbrush body. And again, using the small screwdriver, you can simply just push it up into the body and then just let it drop out, like so. So there is the piston, which is a very small little piece. Okay, so we have pretty much fully disassembled the airbrush. The only thing that remains is a packing seal in the forward portion of the airbrush here, which prevents paint from flowing back into the trigger area. I'm not going to demonstrate how to remove that simply because if it is ever needed to be removed, that would be something that we could address in a maintenance issue. But otherwise, that is a full disassembly of the Grex XG airbrush. In our last video, we demonstrated how to disassemble the Genesis XG airbrush. In this video, we're going to go ahead and reassemble it, but before we do that, I'd like to address the piston, which was the last item that we removed from the airbrush body. Quite often, end users will remove this part, and in the process of cleaning it, they will remove the lubricant that was put on the part when it was produced. So we strongly recommend putting a small dab of glycerin on the piston itself before putting it back into the airbrush. This will maintain the proper triggering characteristics of the airbrush. So let's go ahead and put it back in the airbrush. Simply drop it into the body, and with a small push, just simply push it into the stem of the airbrush body, and it's seated itself nicely. Next, we want to go ahead and address the guide screw. Simply thread it on with your fingers first. Now we want to utilize the large screwdriver and simply turn it in until it agrees with this port on the underside of the airbrush body. As we see the threads of the guide screw inside the airbrush body, we want to set it so that the hole for the guide screw will interface appropriately. Now we want to go ahead and introduce the set screw into the body accordingly. Turn the screwdriver clockwise till it snugs down nicely. You don't need to put excessive pressure, and that's good. Now let's go ahead and put the air valve assembly back on the base of the airbrush stem. Again, hand tight is just fine. And let's go ahead and adjust the front end of the airbrush with the fluid nozzle. With the fluid nozzle, again, we can start it with our fingers. And once it's on, we can go ahead and use the wrench to tighten it down. Again, just a slight turn clockwise until it's snug, and that's good. Now to go ahead and protect the fluid nozzle, let's go ahead and put the nozzle cap on. Okay, let's go ahead and address the trigger area. First we want to put the actuator back in. It has this S curve, which should be backwards S. So when we put it in, we want to put it in 90 degrees and then turn it, and then let it rest at the back of the trigger opening. With the trigger, it has these two tangs, and likewise with the actuator, it also needs to go in sideways. Now, one other aspect is we have this dimple at the back, which will interface with the airbrush body, and when I put it in, you'll see that it interfaces on the back side, so that's a good indicator as to whether you have it in correctly or if you have it reversed. So we're going to put it in, turn it 90 degrees, and then there's two little detents that it sets in. As you can see, the dimple now interfaces with the airbrush body. Next, we want to address the needle chuck. It has this slot on the underside of it. We're going to turn it over, and it interfaces with the set screw that we put in at the bottom of the airbrush body. Next, we want to put the needle spring on, and then we want to thread the spring housing on. Thread it on all the way until it comes to a stop. Now we can put the needle lock on, leave it a little bit loose so that when we push the needle through, it'll slide through nicely. Push it forward, you'll feel it snug up on the packing seal here at the forward portion of the airbrush, and then just gently push until it comes to a stop at the front end. Secure the locking nut, and now everything is functional. On the front side, we want to go ahead and address the needle. So it's protected, let's go ahead and thread the needle cap on. Returning back to the back side, we want to go ahead and thread the handle on until it stops. And then lastly, we can put the paint cup cover on. And there you have it. We have fully reassembled the XG airbrush.